First of all, I would like to extend a warm greeting to my dear friend Agustin Lage.
Quiero extenderle un cálido saludo a mi queridísimo amigo Agustín Laje,
as well as to the entire team on the right every day for organizing this huge event. Thank you very much.
como así también a todo el equipo de la derecha diario por organizar este enorme evento. Muchas gracias.
I also want to thank all the exhibitors who preceded me in, of course, all of you.
También quiero agradecer a todos los expositores que me precedieron y, por supuesto, a todos ustedes.
And I also want to thank all those who could not come, but are following us from their homes.
Y también quiero agradecer a todos aquellos que no pudieron venir, pero nos están siguiendo desde sus casas.
You are the ones who give everything to get ahead in a country which years of uncontrolled statism seem to have condemned the country to misery.
Que años de estatismo descontrolado parecían haber condenado al país a la miseria.
You are the ones who saw your friends pack their bags and emigrate.
Quienes vieron a sus amigos armar valijas y emigrar.
You are the ones who saw your parents suffer inflation and devaluations. You're the ones who saw how every day the dream of economic independence and progress was getting further and further away.
Se alejaba cada vez más y más.
Guys, I believe in spontaneous order.
Muchachos, yo creo en el orden espontáneo.
Organize yourself and solve it. Come on. The political caste stole from us the dream of being able to leave our children a better country to live in. They were robbed us of nothing more and nothing less than hope. And yet, instead of being exiled or locked up in their private lives, they decided to start a fight for the future. They decided to make a heroic gesture from the margins of society. They decided to make a genuine gesture and cry. A roar of freedom that ended up taking the country by storm. And here we are today, having made the best government in the history of Argentina in just a year and a half. As I always say, our movement has three fronts of battle, each one with its own characteristics and its own importance. The front of management, the front of institutional power, and the front of the cultural battle. Through the first, we effectively applied freedom to change the rules of the country. This is very interesting, and it is also the basis of why we believe we are the best government in history. Until we came to power, the best government in history have been the first government of Menem.
Hasta que llegáramos nosotros al poder, el mejor gobierno de la historia había sido.
Fundamental characteristics of that government had basically been a successful stabilization plan, which was that of convertibility, and a set of structural reforms. In times of a plan of stabilization, without a doubt, this economic program designed by the best minister of economy in the world, Caputo, surpasses it. Because not only have we lowered inflation faster, but we have also done it much faster.
Toto Caputo lo supera ampliamente.
Because not only have we lowered inflation faster, but we have also done it much faster.
Porque no solo hemos bajado la inflación más rápido, sino que además lo hicimos sin expropiaciones tipo Plan Bonex.
We did it without having a hyperinflation or two hyperinflations before. We did it without controlling prices. We did it without fixing the exchange
Lo
rate.
hicimos sin controlar precios. Lo hicimos sin fijar el tipo de cambio.
And also, unlike the remaining stabilization programs that adjusted the rates before starting the program to show up its success, we are doing it in the middle of the program.
Antes de iniciar el programa para que se mostrara un éxito aparente después, nosotros lo estamos haciendo en el medio del programa.
If you look at the inflation last month, it means that we went from levels of 300% to levels of 20%, and today we have already left the world podium of countries with more inflation.
A niveles del 20%, y hoy ya salimos del podio mundial de países con más inflación.
And on the other hand, if we clean up these effects of price correction, or if we look at them in terms of basic food basket, or if we look at them in terms of basic total basket, today inflation is already traveling around 10%.
Y por otra parte, si limpiamos estos efectos de corrección de precios, o lo miramos en términos de canasta básica alimentaria, o lo miramos en términos de canasta básica total, hoy
Wow, we are the best government in history.
En torno al 10%. Vaya que somos el mejor gobierno de la historia.
And even more, when they said that we were going to sink the economy into a Great Depression in the light of the stabilization program that was being successful in eliminating inflation, they said that we were going to sink the economy. They said that we were going to enter into a Great Depression.
Vamos a hundir a la economía en una gran depresión a la luz del programa de estabilización que estaba siendo exitoso eliminando la inflación. Decían que íbamos a hundir a la economía. Decían que íbamos a entrar en una gran depresión.
They said that we were going to starve the Argentinians. And yet, when you take the ME, which is the monthly GDP's proxy, in the month of December of 2024, we finished 6 percentage points above the year 2023.
En el mes de diciembre del 24 terminamos 6 puntos porcentuales por encima del año 2023.
In the first quarter, we grew to 5 or 6%, and in the second, we are doing it at 7%. Wow, we are achieving it. And as if all this were not enough, the cruel and heartless liberals have taken out 12 million Argentinians out of poverty.
Y como si todo esto fuera poco, los crueles y desalmados liberales hemos sacado a 12 millones de argentinos de la pobreza.
And not only that, UNICEF itself also recognized that we have taken out 2.5 million children out of poverty. On the other hand, while facing what has to do with institutional power through the second element, we provide ourselves with the necessary power, both at an executive and legislative level, to advance our ideas.
Mientras el frente lo que tiene que ver con el poder institucional, mediante el segundo elemento, nos proveemos del poder necesario, tanto a nivel ejecutivo y legislativo, para avanzar en nuestras
This determines the depth and the speed with which we carry forward the change, and that is taking it forward. And they ask you to please stand up. The boss. And finally, through the last element, that is, the cultural battle, we ensure that these changes are sustainable in the long term, educating the sovereign, in short, that those who have eyes begin to see.
Mediante el último, o sea, la batalla cultural, aseguremos que estos cambios sean sostenibles en el largo plazo, educando al soberano, en definitiva, que quienes tengan ojos empiecen a verla.
In the face of management, we started to have to face the fiscal degenerates.
el frente de la gestión partimos de tener que enfrentar a los degenerados fiscales.
We inherited a giant, broken and corrupt state that sank people into misery. A state that, in the end, hated its citizens and that, as a result, won the hatred of all of them, and with just reason. Although this first year and a half was difficult, we made it clear through actions from the first moment that we came to make structural reforms.
Si bien este primer año y medio fue difícil, dejamos en claro mediante actos desde el primer momento que nosotros sí venimos a cambiar las cosas de raíz.
And that is the second leg that explains why we are the best government in history. Because to this plan of stabilization, structural reforms are added. When the delegated faculties were finished, Dr. Sturzenegger, the Colossus Federico Sturzenegger, the architect of this reform,
el doctor Sturzenegger, el coloso Federico Sturzenegger, el arquitecto de esta reforma,
said that with delegated faculties, that only explained 5% of the work. That is, if you correct the 101 organizations and reforms that were made with delegated faculties, and you know that there is 5%, it means that only Federico Sturzenegger made 2,000 structural reform.
Y saben que eso es el 5%, significa que solamente Federico Sturzenegger hizo 2,000 reformas estructurales.
And if we add to that the DNU 7023 in the basis law, even in its corrected versions, we are in condition to affirm that we made 2,800 structural reforms, 28 times more than those made by Menem.
Hicimos 2,800 reformas estructurales, 28 veces más que las que hizo Menem.
And it is more, if one took it by modifications of delegated faculties, that what they did was difficult the activity, like when, for example, Federico counts the case of the Sandia, or counts the case of the Chata, and so on.
La actividad, digamos, como cuando, por ejemplo, Federico cuenta el caso de la sandía, o cuenta el caso de la chatarra, y demás.
That is a modification of an article, but it is clearly a structural reform.
Una reforma estructural.
And if we take it in terms of articles that have modified the lives of millions of Argentines, the reforms of Dr. Sturzenegger reach 7,200, and if we add the NU and basis, we are in 8,000 structural reforms. Wow, what work we did in a year and a half. In the end, in a year and a half, we have erased 100 years of management, and we will not stop until we become the freest country in the world. However, this is not enough. Now we have to move all the victories in the management front to the institutional front to be able to continue accelerating in this reformist path, because we are truly extreme reformists, try to be extreme reformists.
Para poder seguir acelerando en este camino reformista, porque somos verdaderamente reformistas extremos, orgullosos de ser reformistas extremos.
The battle for the votes is a long march.
La batalla por los votos es una larga marcha.
Imagine that today we only have 15% of the deputies and 10% of the senators, but it is still a march that only goes in one direction, because the country that came to us, the state party, was disastrous.
Solo va en una dirección, porque el país que nos llegó, el partido del Estado, fue desastroso.
And it was so evident to society that they were all accomplices of the same system that it is already a lost cause for them to present themselves to elections.
Que ya es una causa perdida para ellos,
People do not want to see them even in lesser figures. That is why many will be surprised by the results of October. And while we trust that the votes will accompany the achievements of management, the third front of battle, the cultural battle, has another level of difficulty. Thank you.
Y si bien confiamos en que los votos van a acompañar los logros de la gestión, el tercer frente de batalla, la batalla cultural, tiene otro nivel de dificultad. Gracias.
The cultural field is where the concepts that serve as justification for the implementation of public policies and government plans are disputed. Is where it is disputed who is right and why. History has given repeated samples of those who impose culture end up prevailing in a political arena. Agustin Lage Dixit. Because it is culture that generates the terms through which people think and act later in reality.
Pues es la cultura la que genera los términos mediante los cuales la gente piensa y actúa luego en la realidad.
The left knows us perfectly and has been dedicated for decades to infiltrate all Western institutions, subverting their values and molding them to their liking.
Subvirtiendo sus valores y moldeándolas a su gusto.
In this way, we come to a state in which politicians, businessmen, syndicates, press-ubbers, and all the rest of the members of the caste implemented a set of anti-liberty ideas to legitimize themselves and their ideas among the population. I say one who has the contaminated head of all the mental parasites that are going around, those who know and those who do not know too. But rest assured that I am going to get to the contributions of my friend Axel Kesa, but give me time. I am with those of the AGE for now.
Pero quédense tranquilo que ya voy a llegar a los aportes de mi amigo Axel Kaiser, pero denme tiempo. Estoy con los del AGE por ahora.
These ideas are installed in the minds of millions of human beings and are infected with mental parasites until they become unmistakable from the popular ideal.
Esas ideas se instalan en la mente de millones de seres humanos y se contagian como parásitos mentales hasta que se vuelven inconfundibles del ideario popular.
In this way, we come to a situation in which a list of questions that are not even close to being valid is given. As my friend Axel Kesa said in his book, we can reduce them to 7. The first of them is social justice, which has nothing to do with justice, given that it is injustice snatched from one by force to give to another. This constitutes an inequality before the law. This parasite appeals to moral guilt and to an attempt to fight for causes. It gives validity to any level of state intervention, displacing the idea of individual responsibility and making us slaves of the state, because in the end social justice is unjust. Because, as I pointed out, it is preceded by a robbery and, on the other hand, implies being unequal before the law. Which is deeply violent, deeply unjust, and also leads inexorably to misery. In turn, this opens the game to the second parasite, which is the idea of social rights. In fact, today I made a tweet about these ideas of how, for example, they contaminate the brain of the Soviet. This idea seeks to generate expectations and limitations in people, holding that every need is a right and that all rights require state intervention and public spending. The problem is that in order to meet such a disparity, a first law of the economy, which is the law of scarcity, would have to be ignored. There is a wonderful phrase by Thomas Sowell that says, the first law of the economy is scarcity. There is not everything for everyone. And the second reflection he makes is that the first law of politics is to ignore the first law of the economics.
ignorar la primer ley de la economía.
The populists know this. Just weeks ago, they did not vote for spending of $17 billion.
Semanas atrás no votaron un gasto de 17.000 millones de dólares.
And the brutal traitor said that she was going to finance it over 30 years. That's easy to cheat, but I suggest that before cheating, learn to add 2 plus 2. And I don't even tell you what a 2.8 hole in the GDP means in terms of dynamics. It implies an increase in a debt-product ratio of more than 60 percentage points. And this implies sending our young people to ruin from here to eternity. Because it also raises a brutal inconsistency, because if we are going to call each one of our knees rates,
porque además plantea una brutal inconsistencia, porque si a cada una de nuestras necesidades los vamos a llamar de...
The problem is that later those rights have to be paid, and to pay them you have to use resources, and those resources are finite. Therefore, that stupidity, where there is a need, a right is born. The problem is that it leads continuously violation of the budget restriction. Of course, in Argentina not only has this led to a brutal inflation, to take 13 zeros from the currency that we could take 3 more, to make the country with the greatest number of defaults in history, to have the highest tax pressure in the world. But also those nasty ideas have made us one of the poorest countries in the world. In short, this is what they actually do to expand the reach of the state.
En definitiva, esto lo hacen en realidad para expandir el alcance del Estado.
Which gives us the opportunity to talk about the third idea exposed by Kaiser, which is the idea of the benefactor state. In the chapter, in the book, it is the fourth. Neoliberalism comes third, but I will deal with that later. Thus, the idea of the benefactor state, a paternalist state, as if it were an all-powerful God, should provide us with everything we need. What they ignore in this kind of statement is who generates wealth and resources. First of all, it is the private sector, and for the state to provide them, it has to steal them through taxes and bureaucracies, sacrificing economic growth, which is what the high politics must be thinking. And this is so because this ends up generating more dependent societies and a policy where the elections are won by the one who promises the most. But as Francisco de Covido said, no one offers as much as the one who is not going to fulfill. Because those who are in charge of pensions today are the same as those who left pensions of $80. One today pensions are above $350 in a more open economy. Therefore, each dollar buys more than before. And a minor detail, those who retired with the total of the contributions. Those pensions are between $700 and $800. Come to talk about thinking about the pensions if we are the ones who get people out of poverty. It is us, and not that they united us with the inflationary tax. Because we are the ones who get people out of poverty. And not that they united us with the inflationary tax. Because we are the ones who get people out of poverty. And not that they united us with the inflationary tax. On the other hand, it also avoids the notion that when the state takes care of issues that do not actually compete with it, it ends up neglecting the issues that do matter to it. This issue in this government is under discussion all the time. What it can do and what it can't do with the state. But in the transition, what must remain It must be made clear that this type of egalitarianism, the only thing that ends up leading, whether it is the idea of social justice or social justice 2.0, which is social rights, ends up leading that piece of a phrase, I mean equality of opportunities. If fortunately, and thank God, we are all different, that fosters division of work, social cooperation. It makes societies prosperous, they are richer. And also, as Bastiat said, we're trade enters, bullets do not enter. And these brittle equalitarianists generate a society that is deeply violent, authoritarian, and that they also lie for the horde and starve to death. So, in the face of that failure, another parasitic concept appears, which is that of neoliberalism. It is no coincidence that no leftist knows how to define precisely what neoliberalism is. It is a merely emotional concept of the left, which has the objective of creating a cookie for when they govern, and a spying chip for when they fail, and generate rejection of any pro-market reform when they do not have the power. But they do not have a real content, it is just a ghost, a cookie. Therefore, it is our task to turn on the light and let them see that the cookie does not exist. Because, in the end, in reality, those they are injuring are simply those who seek to order the disasters that they leave in their path. Because if there is something they do to perfection, it is to leave tax and financial hell when they finish their government. It is thus that the one who has the ungrateful task of ordering disorder, in general, has beforehand a prepared name, neoliberal. Without going further, they left us 57% poor, 70% poor children, a daily inflation of 1.5% that was annualized was 17,000%, negative international reserves in $12,000 million, 4 monetary bases beating a day, decent paces beating 3 months for the equivalent of 9 monetary bases. That is to say, in less than 3 months they were going to make us multiply the amount of money by 14 times. Not only that, but also the work of the Syrians, where they skased $45,000 million, where they did not leave a disaster to be done. And that bag of immorals come to talk to us, that we are taking the country forward, where we are the fruit of admiration in the whole world. And they talk about the Argentine miracle. But and not even to mention the tax deficit they left us, that were 5 points of the GDP in the Treasury and 10 in the central bank. I remember that when I was campaigning, and I was talking about making the tax adjustment, they said it was impossible, that I was crazy, and I do not know how many other things. That's it, it comes out now. Now the veto comes out soon. In that sense, they said that how much a point per year could be adjusted. And we said that we were going to achieve tax balance in the first year. And after 123 years of uninterrupted tax deficit, because there was only tax balance when we were in default, that is, not paying the debt. That's why it makes me laugh when they say, no, we are making up the debt. They achieve balance with default. And in that context, we made the biggest tax adjustment in the history of humanity in a month. We put the public accounts in order in a month on the financial line. And in turn, in 6 months we ended up damaging the balance of the central bank. Something that no one talked about, how the balance of the central bank was cleaned. Thanks to the enormous task of Santiago Borsali, president of the central bank, and the Secretary of Finance, Pablo Cuerna. But of course, what is the argument? Are the primates? The best known is matrines. They say that we owe each other. This is interesting because when Kirchner came to power, the public debt in Argentina was $140 billion. When we came to power, the consolidated debt, because they always forget to add the disasters that they do in the central bank, was $500 billion. And with that, the debt increased. The debt increased. And with that, the debt increased to $360 billion. If we clean the one that Macri had, which was $60 billion, Kirchner's, which talks about that, we were indebted to $300 billion. It is the most indebted political movement in Argentina's political history. And who are those who think about the future? Because remember that debt is a future tax. Therefore, they are futures that carried by our children on our grandchildren and different generations. While those immoral thieves who are beginning to pay accuse us of indebtedness, we are the first government in Argentina's history to pay debt of $50 billion in a year. Therefore, when these immorals talk about neoliberalism, that word can mean anything, since it only refers to the enemies of state and limited expansionism. Therefore, they also include the businessman, who is busy preserving his business. This leads to the idea of business social responsibility. Many companies feel pressure to defend social causes, but in most cases, it is a simulation guided by marketing precepts. The problem with the small-as-in simulation is that companies neglect their main function, which is to create value, which is derived from the generation of employment and other real social benefits. This has already been resolved by the great Milton Friedman. The businessman, only to perceive economic benefit within the margins of the law, is already a social benefactor, because he can only get rich by giving the neighbor a better quality or better price than the rest. For them, on the other hand, being a social benefactor is to submit to their arbitrary mandates. It is thus the already stressful task of carrying out a business. It's a burden of carrying both with an elephant state and with forced benefit. There is no benefit at gunpoint. Charity, if it is not voluntary, is not charity. And in this sense, the nefarious ideas of promoting diversity, equity and inclusion arose as well. birthing companies and society in general. Equality was replaced by the law. Due to the positive discrimination of social groups, we stopped privileging exons and honesty to begin to use generic criteria or ethnic ones. This fragmented society pigmented it in invented struggles, while causing everyone to lose faith in the neutrality of institutions. The modern state is fragmented into 1,000 pieces. Fortunately, in Argentina, only the state suffered this perversion of the law, since our disconnection from the rest of the world mitigated the impact of this particular parasite, and is a fruit of the dearth of all these parasitic ideas. The desire to criticize the civilization in which they live leads them to excessively romanticize wildlife, criticizing the model that took 90% of humanity out of extreme poverty is a blow where it looks. That is why they must disguise these ridiculous criticisms under well-thinking ideas that have little meaning and much to do with their ideology. Thus, they sell in primitive cultures ideals of purity, natural harmony, and resistance against the evils of modern life. According to this idea, all the indigenous people were respectful to the extreme of nature, respectful with other tribes, and they did not know cruelty in any of its forms. It seems that they are flogged from paper to paper. It is assumed that the leftists know about history. It is assumed, but it seems that they only know about history according to what was told. Let's say, the one who smoked his father's money, who married a millionaire, and he smoked his wealth, and made children for the housemaid, and then he lived off his friend until he died. Angel. Of course. The king of parasites, Karl Marx. Was that fact? I want to tell you that we are all the same. With that pantomime of ancestral wisdom, they pretend to make us believe that the world was perfect until trade emerged. They thus legitimize destructive policies for nations in development, such as anti-development amnesty, or the legitimacy of the modern state. To top it off, they teach this as true and important universities under the motto of anti-colonialism, as well as so many other ideas that have been bombarded for so long. Under the expansion of these ideas, whether in the academy, the media, the public offices, and even in Hollywood movies, the left has arranged to put the most prestigious people of each society on their side, using them as a vehicle of their ideology as much as possible. I mean education, culture, and the media, and all of this, financed at the expense of the taxes of the prosperous and affluent citizens to whom they were entrusted, to demonize as if they were the origin of all evil. This is a game in which, today, unfortunately, we start with a disadvantage. We must recognize that they did it better. When we recognize that they were better at the cultural battle, we will be in condition, and many of this is thanks to Augustin Lage, to Nicolas Marquez, to Valerini, to Axel Kaiser, and to so many other giants of our thinking have begun to give this cultural battle as true gladiators, and not to mention that causes that scares them from streaming algorithm. Although liberalism was put at the forefront of the cultural battle, changing the course of human history since its birth in the 17th century, during the last century, it has lost ground in front of collectivism. The liberals neglected the battle for ideas and left it in the hands of the people, and the people, and we neglected the battle for ideas, and we left the doors open to the flag of the left That is why we cannot lose one more second. Our ideas are better, but the evidence says that with that it is not enough. We have to know how to communicate them, and that is why we must emulate the left in this respect, doing our march on the different places of the country, every radio wave and every television channel of the country must see someone defending and promoting the ideas of freedom. And we must do it in a sustained way, so that sooner or later the left has not been more than a bad dream. We had to fight in the media, and it had already been almost 15 years fighting in the economy. That is, we must fight, even if it seems a crazy task. Only the crazy are the ones who can dream of a future, and they are the ones who also have the balls to change it, the ones who really do it. In this sense, the earth, when making the decision to fight, have decided to become three soldiers of the cultural battle, of the battle for ideas, which is the one that will give you sustainability and time to this path of glory that we are starting since we arrived at the government. Because seeing is also seeing the state in which 100 years of uncontrolled statism left our public discussion, 100 years in which we were progressively infected in all our institutions with ideas contrary to freedom and true progress, 100 years in which all the institutions that once destined our country to greatness were infected by ideological parasites. But it is important to understand that the majority of people have internalized these contagious ideas merely because it is the only thing they knew, and because, in addition, these parasites feed on the noblest thing people have, which is their sense of humanity and their good intentions. But they still have the germ of freedom within them, and they can still be persuaded to change their opinion. That is why the cultural battle is so important. That is why I want to give you a message of hope. We have here a beautiful reflection to make. In the year 2023, the Argentines decided a change of direction, which we have to confirm in September in the province of Buenos Aires, in each province, and give a tremendous applause in the month of October. We have to understand that in October, on the one hand, will be the status quo, the state party, the useless, parasitic, and useless political caste will be the pay-savers, the left-wing journalists, will also be the unionists, will be the businessman, the pre-bent businessman, and on the other hand, we will be the Argentines of good, who want to embrace the ideas of freedom to make Argentina great again. What happened in the last 5 years in Argentina is a unique phenomenon, because a series of conditions that generated a perfect storm were combined so that people can see it and build antibodies for the parasites that operated in their minds. The disaster of the last 3 Argentine governments, the unbridled inflation produced by a degenerate economic policy, and the liberticide that implicated the eternal quarantine, set up a nightmare so horrible that many Argentines had no alternative but to wake up. I don't forget that there was a Saki impregnable who said that in a pandemic there are no rights, and it's disgusting that someone goes and embraces with that unbridled love. And it's not clear to you. I'm talking about Mr. Mines, who is a senator, for heaven's sake. So, the suffering of our people served as fuel for new light, a new hope among the darkness. Argentina saw in the liberal right a beacon being born, because for years, and in solitude, we have been insisting against the devils of the parasitic state, desperate for its budgetary affection. Nisman, for example, that say, but it's not the only example, let's say, where the political caste is charged with the lives of human beings, and this, while hiding behind the discourse of human rights, as Saturn shows, a caste of ours is children to feed its obese, insatiable stomachs. Obese, insatiable stomachs. They had a whole set of mechanisms set in motion to prevent something like what could happen to us, a universe of clientel relations with businessmen, social leaders, and journalists dedicated to make an attack. Anyone who dared to face them, they thought they had the country domesticated and condemned to penal servitude, but we were able, and we were able precisely because we brought the truth with us, and not only mental parasites are contagious. The truth, when this is countered with conviction and with vulnerability, is also contagious. That is why we are now pulling forward the history of Argentina from its dark last century of humiliation. That is why forums like this are so important, where we dedicate ourselves to discuss and talk about the ideas of freedom and how to spread them and bring them to the general public, because we want every Argentinian to take their country in their blood with pride, to stop seeing the history with shame. Thank you. What a voice. We put all this into practice with a political methodology that has been novel to many. I doubt. That is, given that we are not jokers, we will seek to prosper through the free association between private individuals. We did not have money. We did not have equipment or territory, nor friends in the media. Only the word of his humble servant, living speeches of economic theory in a square, and the cell phones of all of you, the purest weapon of freedom that disrupts the circulation of information and of these ideas. In that sense, I would like to stop here to recognize the right to daily life, which became a digital diary made by two teenagers to be the most read diary in all of Latin America in a matter of a few years. Congratulations to all who were part of the daily right of their creators. returning to a path transited in campaign, we were mocked. They said that we were nothing more than a barrio phenomenon, and yet we put 2 seats of deputies with our modest campaign. In case that was not already a milestone, 2 years later, we won nothing more in nothingness than the presidency of the country, being a candidate with the most votes in history, having done simultaneously the most austere campaign in history. In short, to fight in the margins, keeping ourselves faithful to the ideas of freedom, to reach power by the force of predicating our ideas and to be able to demonstrate all of its power is something that a Kirchnerist will never understand, because they are rented militants and other militants who do not know what they are. Some of them are rented militants, and others also have rented militants. And obviously, the liberals of caffeine and the liberals of Captain will not understand either that they are entangled in the ways to self-sabotage systematically. In their childish understanding of politics, they believe that they can win the war in the muds because the mud seems foggy to them. I usually mention that if you want to go to the fields and see a game of Argentina, one of the things that happens is that the stands are very beautiful, very colorful and everything, but if you put the ball in the middle of the field, no matter how much you scream, sing, the ball does not move. Do the experiment as many times as you want. Therefore, if you want to start winning, you have to score goals. And to score goals, you have to play in the field. That's what the stands do. Messi scores the goals. In this sense, we do not only get ourselves into the mud, but we also understand that to get into the mud, we need organization, because we fight against those who have been in charge of the entire market, and the government are the best vehicle for ideas. Organization and order are the best vehicle for action to change the country from the roots. It is necessary to have both legs. We are clear that the poorly organized can only be won by becoming well organized. We understand that when it comes to fighting against the Leviathan of the thousand heads, pragmatism and verticalism, there are 2 doors inside us. That is why we inaugurate this new way of doing politics, which consists of being free and at the same time organized. Not organized but slaves, as is Saxism, no free but dispersed and impotent, as were the liberals, historically in Argentina. Understanding this is that we managed to take our ideas into practice, and it is thanks to being able to put them into practice that we managed to show that they're superior. As I said before, in these months, we have achieved a lot, and in just a year and a half, we have counted decades of destruction by sowing the seeds of the future Argentine power. We show the world that we are stronger than ever, that we only needed to get the state spirit off our necks. Today, everywhere they talk about our economic miracle without going any further. The President of France has just announced his own chainsaw plan, and that is spreading all over the world. Wherever you look, we are making the best government in history. And for the innumerable achievements achieved, it seems that most of the work is done. However, we must not forget, not even for a second, that this is just beginning.
Sin embargo, no debemos olvidar ni por un segundo que esto recién comienza.
It is not only necessary to undo a century of accumulated misery and educate our fellow citizens in the decision of freedom. We have to do this with the entire party of the state against us, operating and sabotaging all our attempts to right the ship they sunk. Meanwhile, there is, legitimately against us, all the institutional mechanisms that were originally created to protect the fundamental rights of freedom and property, and also the switch of light. There's something very interesting, and that is that if before going out to the field, it is necessary to cheat, it is because you know you are a loser. Today the losers are known to be losers. In fact, I imagine that many of you have seen the movie Gladiator, when the filthy, uncomfortable garbage decides to fight hand in hand with Maximus and to go out to fight. Before fighting, he had to stab him, and he started to bleed. That is what the culturism needs to do. It needs to cheat, because it cannot win in a legitimate way. But as it happened in Gladiator, it will happen in Argentina. Maximus' freedom will win the comfortable Kirchnerista. In fact, Republican institutions that were designed to prevent the emergence of a dictatorship have become tools of oppression and submission to the service of perpetuating the despotism of the bureaucrats, congresses that do not session properly, churches who dictate, on issues in which they do not have the authority to do so, had become tools of interference, and all in order to stop the reforms of freedom that the people ask for screaming. And I say, in case that were not enough, we have to deal with the infallible traitors, people who were chosen with the clear mandate to free Argentina from the yoke of the state, only to turn back the short time after assuming the seats to the Argentine people, dazzled by the supposed high politics. But just as history reminds us of the heroes, it also reminds us of the traitors. And in the deepest circle of hell, the traitors are like a remote, cold and dark place. They suffer the eternal torment of those who were stabbed in the back, of those who were held by the hand. In short, time will put each one in the right place. For our part, we are not traitors. We take too seriously the task that has been entrusted to us by the Argentines. As I have already said, we defend a just and noble cause, much bigger than each one of us. We're free individuals that are voluntarily associated with a common goal. It is our duty to submit ourselves to something that exceeds us, resigning our personal ambitions, our comfort, our desires, to carry out the greatest feat that our nation has seen since its independence, liberating the Argentine people from the tyranny of their omnipresent state. We are at war, and no matter how repetitive the story sounds, it has been demonstrated that's the only way to defeat the organized evil is through the well-organized. That is why we are millions, but we move like one, and thus we will crush them into the urns. We are in the midst of a new, bizarre moment in our history. The next national elections will determine if the change that we have been carrying out since December 2023 will reconsolidate it, or we will return to the terrible, decadent past in which the Casterism, its sequoias and the entire state party have dragged us. That is why this year, with which we left during the 23rd, is the moment when freedom moves forward and demonstrates that it is time to change this great nation once for all and forever. Freedom, 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 in such a way that that line of leaders that was led by the corrupt, condemned, a lay husband, and the worst ministry of economy in history is only about memory, in the memory of the Argentines. But to achieve this, we cannot neglect, and I second it, political caste still there, waiting for us to make mistakes. They prepared all their lives, serving the state, and jumping from position to position. They know perfectly every gear of the machine to prevent machine that they themselves built, to avoid the changes that society demands. They want to see us weak, to be able to take us on, and thus regain power, with the sole purpose of taking freedom from every good Argentine. We must not allow it. It is time to be more united than ever, faithful to our purpose. They want us to be a country of poor and subject. We want a prosperous and free country. This is the slogan that we must preach throughout and throughout the country, comprising us also, going to vote and to monitor. As Marco Aurelio said, there is no short path towards greatness. Patience and perseverance are fundamental. This has just begun, and it is up to us to make a great Argentina once again. Let us not be afraid. We have already won before, and we will do it again, as we have won before. Let us not be afraid. We have already won before, and we will do it again, as we have won before. Thank you, Cordoba. May God bless the Argentines. May the strength of heaven be with us. Long life freedom, damn it. Long life freedom, damn it. Long life freedom, damn it. Thank you very much.